My name is Matt Miller. I work at Bloomberg Television. It's been 14 and a half years I've been here. I started out in Frankfurt covering the stock exchange at the end of '99, beginning of 2000, and then I moved to Berlin before switching to television full time. So I started covering Bitcoin basically on a fluke in December. I had been doing stories about Bitcoin, small little pieces here and there for the last year or so, but I didn't really have my head wrapped around it for certain. So in December, a bunch of my producers came to me and said, Bitcoin has soared above $1,000, and we really want to figure out a way to cover this, and maybe you should just buy a Bitcoin and see where it goes from there. So I did a little research and found out that a couple other reporters, there was a woman in San Francisco, for example, who lived only on Bitcoin, and I thought that would be a good way to figure out how it works. So I decided to do pretty much the same thing. I bought a Bitcoin and didn't spend dollars, with the exception of gasoline and things that were already set up in my bank account for 2 weeks. So it was 12 days of Bitcoin, and in hindsight, that was maybe too much. We did the 12 business days of Bitcoin, so by the time we were into our third week, it was a little bit of Bitcoin overload, but maybe just 12 standard days would have been perfect, or 2 weeks. It worked out really well for a number of reasons. I sort of fell in love with the community. B, I had a great time using Bitcoin, and C, it ran into Christmas, so I was able to purchase all of my family and friends' Christmas presents with Bitcoin. So it became kind of a really fun experiment to try and figure out how to pay for everything with Bitcoin, and it worked out pretty easily. One of the things that I did to research Bitcoin was going on certain forums on the web, and on Reddit especially. Reddit has a subreddit, Bitcoin, and I just started asking questions there, and at first people were criticizing me for being really ignorant about Bitcoin, and the first couple of broadcasts that I did, a lot of people thought, this newbie is clueless and so green, and that was true. So I never, I said, listen guys, I hadn't researched this before. We just decided to jump in feet first, and I'd really appreciate your help. I take the criticism seriously and try and work on fixing those things that I was getting wrong. And the community, especially on Reddit, but also in a number of other forums, really embraced that concept of like a new guy just trying to learn how it works, and really started chipping in with corrections, tips, comments, trying to help me out here and there, and really got behind me. So that was one of the reasons that I really got into it so much. On the other hand, also I love the concept of Bitcoin and a decentralized, sort of a libertarian style currency. I can get into that politically. It's very fringe, I'd say still, yes. Although it's much less so than it was before I started doing this reporting. Most people before I started this project thought this is a currency that's only used to buy drugs and pay for hookers on the Silk Road, and it can only be used for money laundering and for illegal purposes. And I was one of those people also. I thought, what else do you do with this besides buy illegal stuff and do illegal things? But after I started covering it and realized that you can do so much else with it, and that was only a small portion of what people were doing with it, and that, obviously we're in the media, we love big sensational headlines, big sensational stories, so we gravitate towards those kind of things. And you're not going to do a piece about some guy just buying his groceries with Bitcoin, or me paying for my nephew's Christmas toys with Bitcoin. It's just not as exciting as someone buying, a kilogram of cocaine with Bitcoin. It's a much more fun story. So I realized that what we were doing in the media, and I tried to counteract that as much as I could. And I think, at least as far as the people here at Bloomberg, I really changed the minds of a lot of other, on-air reporters and anchors. And also I think a lot of the people that use the Bloomberg terminal or that watch Bloomberg TV, our viewers, started coming around to the idea. I'm not sure it was just me, because it's become obviously a lot more mainstream and a lot more legit over the last 6 months, but the reason is that people are trying to understand it, and as they understand it, as soon as someone gets it, then they realize the possibilities, the good possibilities for the most part. For one thing, you can just see the money that's flowing into it from Wall Street, from Silicon Valley, from venture capital, and really it's more of the adults in the room are starting to really believe in it, and believe in it enough to put down millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars in order to invest in infrastructure, in order to try and bring it to more and more people. So that's one of the things that you see. On the other hand, the news coverage, as I said, started just about Silk Road. This coverage started just about these crazy internet nerds, It was a story about something that no one understood, and now there's so many more stories, so many people have gotten interested in it enough to learn about it, so you're starting to see more fair and balanced, for lack of a better term, news coverage of Bitcoin in general. Of course, we don't tell the normal stories that aren't scandalous. I mean, that's not what we do. You wouldn't tune in, you wouldn't click on a story about an average Joe just leading his life using Bitcoin and nothing special happens to him. It's much more fun to read a story about somebody who loses $400 million, or someone who, pays for hitmen, or, someone who is laundering money. I mean, those are the exciting things that you want to click on, that you're going to read about. I don't even think you'd notice a story if it weren't about those things. So, but the interesting thing is now we can also do stories about someone investing, $1 million in a new Bitcoin company, or someone investing $10 million in a new Bitcoin fund, or we can do a story about, ways that a retiree can put his or her savings into Bitcoin. Now that turned out to be not a great idea because it's very risky, but you're starting to see more of these stories about people believing in it, and rather than only stories about the Dread Pirate Roberts. It definitely could go there. It could be a massive market cap. It could explode. I think 5 years is a short time period, because what I often think is that the future of Bitcoin or digital currency, from a broader perspective, is really about machine-to-machine payments. So by the time you have an unmanned taxi driving you around New York, and then going to power up at an unmanned power station, or going to get repairs at an unmanned auto shop, you'll see the machine-to-machine payments done with some sort of digital currency. I think machine-to-machine payment is one of the big parts of the future of Bitcoin or digital currency. You can debate about whether it's going to be Bitcoin or something else, but I feel like the way Bitcoin evolves, it sort of takes all the good aspects of alternative currencies and also is able to discard the bad or problematic aspects of the current source code. So I think Bitcoin will probably be the winner overall. Mark Andreessen's op-ed in DealBook was something that a lot of people in the finance community saw. And people in the finance community are traditionally skeptics. They love scandalous stories as well, so they thought about Bitcoin in scandalous terms until he laid out a number of other uses for Bitcoin, even beyond just as a currency to buy stuff. And I think a lot of people became believers. I got a lot of calls from Wall Street guys saying, all right, I read Mark Andreessen's piece, now how can I buy some Bitcoin? and I gave him, as many tips as I could. I mean, it is still fringe, but consider that a year ago it was only worth $30. So it's a fringe asset that has increased by 20-fold in value in the last 12 months. It's not that fringe, right? I think Wall Street is quick to evolve, and we'll start using it, dealing in it, making markets in Bitcoin, this year. Barry Silbert's fund, for example, raised I think $50 million or $60 million, and I asked him once, who's investing in your fund, and he said, well, I can't tell you specific names, but I will tell you that it's a lot of managing directors and banks. And why are they investing in it? Because they know that their employers are going to start dealing in it this year, and they're essentially front-running that trade. So I don't think Wall Street considers it a threat. It's interesting that you kind of remind me that there are two different communities around Bitcoin, or expectations of Bitcoin. One is this kind of Wall Street community, or people that think of it as an asset that will be worth more money, an investable asset. And they see the sort of financial side of it. And then there's the hardcore Bitcoin community that believes in it as a movement, that believes in the things that Bitcoin can achieve, and aren't as concerned, at least they say, with the actual dollar value of it as it fluctuates. I've never covered something. Normally I cover stuff that I love to deal with: cars, motorcycles, fun stuff that I was already in love with before I started covering it. But I've never covered anything that drew me in quite as much as this. Even on the automotive side, I've never covered anything that had a community that was so, at first, kind of difficult to understand and almost closed, but was willing to kind of open the doors and suck me in. I mean, going to Bitcoin meetups and going on Reddit, and now people stop me in the street, on an almost daily basis because they loved my Bitcoin coverage. I've been on TV for 10 years, I've anchored a number of different shows for 2 hours at a time, and I'm doing stories that people care about. At least they click on: car stories, motorcycle stories, fun, golf stories, sailing, sports. But I've never gotten the kind of notoriety that I have by covering Bitcoin for just 2 weeks. So it's pretty intense, the amount of either love or hate that people have for this subject. It's just either you're a believer or you're not. Hardly anybody falls neutral. But it's a nascent technology. I mean, I haven't done any research on the beginning of credit cards or the beginning of debit cards, but it's another technology that everyone uses, everyone accepts. Nobody understands how it works. People don't even get compound interest, let alone how the actual electronics work of using a credit card. But they still use them and believe in them, and nobody refuses to accept an American Express card, right? For me, the greatest aspects about Bitcoin is I feel like as an American and kind of as a libertarian, it's great to give people an alternative that isn't as much under the thumb of the government as the dollar is. Now, I'm not anti-Fed or anti-dollar. I use them all the time, and God knows I love them, but it's just cool to have something that's truly free. I mean, Bitcoin is really freedom, in my opinion, and whereas no other mechanism for payment beyond barter really is. And then, of course, the idea of inflation. Obviously, Bitcoin is incredibly volatile right now, so I'm not sure if I would advise anyone to put money that he or she really needs into Bitcoin. But if your only other choice is Zimbabwean dollars, or if you live in Venezuela, or someplace where you can virtually expect your currency to decline by half or 90% in the next year, there's little other choice. So one of the things that I think is interesting is that for wealthy or relatively wealthy Americans, there isn't much of a need for Bitcoin for the average person. But for other people, especially in the developed world, or foreign workers here that need to send money back, it's really got a lot of utility, because you need to do it. You need to send money back without taking too much of a transaction fee. You're only sending back $20 or $100 or $200. And you don't want to do it with a service that charges you 20%, and you don't want to send it in a currency that's going to depreciate by 20% in a week. So. Bitcoin benefits from that. Is the skepticism really growing? I'm not sure. I've been covering the Fed for 10 years, and I've been reading about people skeptical of the central bank for 20. It's just, it's a really fun thing to be skeptical of. It invites a lot of conspiracy theory. Jekyll Island, 1913, it's so exciting. And, Ron Paul will say it's only worth 93, it's only worth 7% of what it was, 100 years ago. I get into that. It's a lot of fun. It's exciting. But I don't know if it's really grown that much. Ron Paul is, 30 years old.
In the fall of 2008, the world financial system nearly fell apart because of the incompetence and instability of the banking system.
With Bitcoin, anyone can send and receive any amount of money anywhere in the world, basically for free. And there's nothing that the big banks or politicians can do to stop it.
At the Money 2020 conference, there was a Bitcoin panel where 4 Bitcoiners were speaking, and behind me were executives and chairmen of the board of several different credit unions. And one turned to the other and said, "These guys don't know the true meaning of evil till we fuck them."
You see, I just want your cash.